Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Podcast Strikes Back. My name is George and you're listening to our weekly podcast with the boys Connor.
Hello.
And Benny.
Hi there.
You sound so enthusiastic, Benny. It's episode 150 of the weekly show. It's been about 3 years since we kicked this off. I actually had no preconceived ideas. Yeah, cheers to that. Preconceived ideas that we would get past 10 episodes. And even though we are not necessarily the most trending podcast out there, I think that I really do treasure these moments that we have together, and everyone's commenting. We've got some really nice comments this week from some new fans checking out some old content, and it's just nice to see in our little tiny corner of the world that there's a couple people there tuning in. Yeah. So
whenever I see like a genuinely nice comment, my first thought is like, is this a bot? People aren't actually that nice, are they?
No, it always is. It always is.
And this image,
but just
like,
take it.
Kind of like,
just take it.
Oh yeah.
Take the win.
I have that moment that I'm like, oh, yeah. All right. Thanks.
So, fellas, it's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully, cheers to another 150 more. And let's on episode 200, maybe do a real solid like retrospect. And maybe even listen back to the first episode. I think that would be pretty hilarious, man. Anyway, let's catch up on what's going to be happening in this episode 150 of our weekly podcast. We've got some updates on the Oscars, sound mixing, sound editing. Oh my goodness, the scandals. Everyone's raging. It's crazy. We've also got some updates for Matrix 4 with some returning individuals, which is interesting for us to talk about. We've got question of the week later, and at the end of the episode, we've got the first edition of Movie Book Club. Oh, I'm excited to talk about that. And Connor has chosen this week's episode, which is Prisoners, my first watch of that. So stick around to the end of the episode for that. I'm very much looking forward to it. But before we get into all the rest of the movie nonsense, Benny, let's catch up on what everyone's been watching. What have you been doing, dude?
I've been all over the map this week. But the first thing I started pretty shortly after our last episode, actually, as it just hit Netflix, was one I know you watched a little of, Connor, as well, at least, which is the new comedy shows from Ben Schwartz and Thomas Middleditch, just titled Middleditch and Schwartz. Now, this is the kind of show that on paper is something I would generally steer well away from, because it's basically just an hour live show, completely improvised, just based on a few little questions they ask some audience members, and coming from almost anyone else.
Kind of concept. I was just going to say, it sounds like kind of the concept of like something that you'd have to go on a Thursday night, like someone would drag you to it, like, hey, we're going to a live show that's all improv. You're like, oh,
tickets are free.
Okay.
Yeah, but coming from these two guys, I couldn't get into it quick enough, because I think they're two of the most naturally funny people on the planet. Ben Schwartz, probably the more well-known of the two, from Parks and Rec and more recently Sonic the Hedgehog, maybe less successfully. But and I got to say, I absolutely adored all 3 episodes, all 3 hours of this show. I was almost in tears several times just from laughter, and I don't get that too often, so I was very happy with them. Did you finish them off, Connor?
I got 2 episodes, and there's something like, I think the way that I enjoy this is the same way that I enjoy bloopers. Like there's something that is just undescribably funny about watching people, break and laugh and like genuinely laugh.
Well, they make it so hard on themselves. They construct these scenarios with like up to a dozen different characters that they each jump in and switch out roles on, and they have to remember all these names and like where the positions
and
of where everyone
like
is.
Switch roles that each other have done. Like, one person might start a character and the other person might have to pick up that character later. And honestly, the most entertaining thing about it is watching them try and keep track of these characters, trying to keep track of like the names and the accents and like just those like, little breaks is fucking hilarious.
Yeah, I enjoyed this immensely. I don't know who I'd recommend it to necessarily, though, except people who already like Middleditch and Sword, just because that was definitely the main hook for me.
Yeah. So obviously, like Middleditch is quite famous from Silicon Valley,
and Godzilla, King of the
Schwartz,
Monsters,
as you said, and Godzilla. Sorry. So they're both kind of like relatively well known in their own right. I'd actually, argue that Middleditch is quite well known because of Silicon Valley. But I mean, this is nothing like. This is a little bit more what you come to expect from Ben Schwartz, a little less from Middleditch based on their previous stuff, but they've fallen into it so well. And because they're such good mates, it makes for one of those really entertaining shows to watch, because it's like the whole thing is about, being genuine, right? Like it's the laughter is genuine, the panic is genuine, the friendship is genuine, all of that. It's really fantastic.
And their friendship is just so palpable. It makes it just a joy to watch end to end. On a very different end of the spectrum, I watched finally something I've been meaning to get to, Charlie Kaufman's Anomalisa. I don't know if you guys are even aware of this one. It's a stop motion film from a few years back from Charlie Kaufman, director of Synecdoche, New York, one of the greatest films ever made, writer of Being John Malkovich adaptation. And just an absolute genius, probably the most kind of meta and heady screenwriter working in Hollywood. I find his stuff to always just be among the most amazing stuff you're ever going to see. And this movie, it definitely did not disappoint. It was another pretty hard-hitting dive into his psyche with some of the most impressive stop-motion animation I've seen. Not in terms of like fluidity, like your Leica films, Paranorman and whatnot, but the expressiveness and the believability of the characters, who look almost like just real humans, was absolutely insane.
I'm looking at some stills from it, and it looks pretty impressive, to be honest.
Anomalisa.
And an Anomalisa, yeah.
So like Anomaly and Lisa combined.
Cool.
It was not an easy watch. The lead character is extremely unlikable, I found. But to a point, like it's very much what the movie's going for, I think. But yeah, really cool if you're looking for something a bit headier, that one. Then another complete left turn. I watched a childhood favorite of mine the other night, The Mask, starring Jim Carrey. I love this movie in my bones. It's probably not a critical favorite. I don't know if anyone could watch this movie today and say there's anything good about it necessarily for them, but I love every second of it. So it's so much fun to watch that again.
It's Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey. And I'm kind of pretty much down with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the graphics have held up pretty well, huh?
Yeah, this was like 94, I think.
Yeah.
This was ILM, one of ILM's first jobs after doing Jurassic Park. And they were doing groundbreaking work, bringing like these crazy Looney Tunes characters to life in live action. I think it's really impressive stuff. And the practical stuff, the makeup, the look of him. He looks so much like the original Doug Mankey comic book character. It's insane. It's really impressive. I think at that time, for a comic book adaptation to be so faithful in certain ways, tone mostly, but also to be kind of adult in ways, while also being really goofy and for kids as well. It's something you don't see much anymore. I really love that film.
Yeah, good times, man. I love the cartoon as well. I love the film. I love the cartoon. I loved everything about The Mask when I was a kid.
It's a funny era when like every Jim Carrey franchise would get a cartoon accompanying it. There was The Mask, there was Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, I think might have had one.
I was on that.
They're all so different, the way they portrayed Jim Carrey. And then I also watched just a bit of, obviously we've talked about this ad nauseum on the show, I don't need to go on, but I just watched like half of Civil War, Captain America, which that movie just blows me away every time I watch like a minute of it. I can't believe how impressive that movie is, especially because just before watching that, I'd been watching a bit of the Tim Story Fantastic Four movie from 2005. And it's like, man, how far these things have come in that time. Even though that Fantastic Four movie, I got to say, it has its strengths. It kind of plays into the silliness of the material. has a bit of fun with it. It's overall not a good film, but there's some stuff they do right. But it did make me think.
It's probably the best Fantastic Four movie. I mean, not that that's saying much,
yeah.
but with what we have to play with.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a toss-up between that and the Silver Surfer.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
We can all agree it's definitely not the most recent one, Fan Four Stick.
Still haven't seen it.
But
watch the first half. Watch the first half. And then when it says 3 years later, literally turn your TV off. Literally just turn it off and go, I have seen the best of this, and walk away.
Georgie, there's a good recommendation for our film book club. You could say just the first half of Fantastic Four 2016 and see what Connor thinks of the movie.
And that's all we review. We don't even address the back half. Like, I'll rewatch it. I won't even talk about it.
I'll watch the first half if you two watch the second half.
Oh.
Exclusively. Not just like the first half and the second half.
I've got a way better pick anyway, so fuck you.
But watching those two movies in close conjunction really made me interested to see what the MCU is going to do with the Fantastic Four, probably in the not too distant future, I feel. Because I think there's a lot of potential there to have a really unique set of characters within this framework they've created.
That's one of the toughest ones to get right, in my opinion. It is so of its time. It's got that sort of like futurist 1950s. If they can make it work, like, I will tip my hat to them. But that's not an easy one to repackage for the modern era. Just from my sort of just thinking about it. Yeah, like Stretchy Man.
Stretchy Man from like a concept level, just that really weirds me out on how that's not going to look wonky on screen, like from a visual level. I mean, if you look at like things like
and
Aquaman,
the thing as well, they've never nailed him.
But if you think of something like Aquaman, who like seems a bit silly, but you like
recontextualize,
they manage to pull it off, and I don't know how they do that with something like fucking whatever his name is, Stretchy Dude.
I think Benny's right. Like the futurist 1950s space age, that's definitely the vibe. But tough. I will be so interested to see how that turns out, because I would have no idea how to approach. Not saying I have any ability to approach these things, but just within these conversations that we have. That one seems like a tough one to get right.
If you can't do it, George, no one can.
That's it, dude. Thank you. I'm
there
glad
are
you said it.
completely unfounded rumors flying around sort of recently that Joss Whedon might be taking a crack at it, might be coming back to Marvel for something, and I think he could have some fun with it, but we'll see how that goes.
I mean, that kind of like dialogue style might suit that property.
And the last thing I watched, which I was kind of banking on you guys having seen too, because it's like the big Netflix release of the week, but no, just me, unfortunately, was Extraction, the new Chris Hemsworth film. And I was only assuming you guys might see it just because there's just nothing else kind of getting released right now. This is kind of an interesting one.
It's definitely something I will watch, but
I actually I bet money just before you came into the call earlier that you would have seen this already, because it seems like such a Connor film.
Money, I think it was your left hand, dude. So I'll be taking that.
God damn it. So this is directed by Sam Hargrave, first-time director. He's mostly known for being a stunt coordinator and a stuntman, largely in the MCU. So he was a stunt coordinator for Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame. So this guy's got some bona fides. He's really fantastic in that regard. And in that regard, this movie does not disappoint. The stunts and the action sequences are like top level stuff. Like,
cool.
There's like a they feel very reminiscent to me of more Eastern films. Like I was reminded of The Raid a lot in its kind of aesthetic and the impact of the fighting and the violence. And it is violent. It feels like an algorithm wrote this film for Netflix, because it is exactly their niche for their own movies. Like, it's, starring like a big Hollywood star that they've grabbed for like the name and the weight that he can throw. They got Joe Russo in there as well, as he wrote it, which is interesting. It's way too violent to be a wide release theatrical thing. They throw in David Harbour in there, like a big Netflix star. It's really memeable as well. There is an extended sequence that I'm surprised I haven't seen more of on social media already, where Chris Hemsworth is just running around slapping the shit out of a group of children who are trying to kill him. It is kind of awesome.
You have sold that to me purely on that scene.
I'm going to watch it just for that now.
Please do. And not just for that, I honestly think it's not that bad. I know that's very faint praise, but it's it's very kind of standard plot wise. I actually was really struggling to follow the plot because it's kind of like it's basically, it's set in India. A guy's kid gets kidnapped, and they bring in this mercenary, Chris Hemsworth, to come get him. And there's a few twists and turns along the way. And I was not trying too hard to follow, but I wasn't really following.
This sounds like the perfect Netflix movie, right? Like it's not something that you'd go to the cinema for. It's not something that you'd like. You know, it's just kind of one of those things. You're like, you know what, I want to buzz out and watch action for 2 minutes. It's the exact same 2 hours. It's the exact same reason you watch things like The Raid or Dread or those kind of like high octane type films. You know, often ultra violent.
But I think what's interesting about this one is I'm pretty sure they've either murmurs of a number 2 of this or even a greenlit confirmation. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we have talked at length about how Hemsworth has struggled to find his footing in any other role other than Thor, and maybe Extraction. This is like a John Wick. You know, John Wick 4 is coming out. You know, can he clock in a trilogy here? I will not be surprised because it seems pretty favorable on the whole from everyone.
I don't see it having the same legs as John Wick was a bit of a phenomenon.
No,
like
I don't think it'll get to that level.
Keanu Reeves.
This is his,
and that movie shouldn't have been good.
And you know,
this
will always be his B card. You know, like Thor is always Hemsworth's A card, but you know, his Extraction, you know, he's got that extra thing, extra bedding to kind of land on to have his career sort of prosper for the next decade because, you know, he had that whale film, he had this, that, and the other, and it's just nobody's really taken the bait. So it's cool to see, because I've always liked Hemsworth, and it's cool to see that the positive reaction seems to be heading around.
Yeah, completely agree. It's cool to see him find a movie like this. It's really stripped back of the kind of Hollywood veneer that all these things have. Like, for instance, he just speaks with his natural accent, which he does not get to do in any of these movies. You know, you get all these producers involved and stuff, and it seems like everything, all these 4-quarter movies have got to be as bankable as they possibly can, and you can't have an Australian star speaking Australian for some reason. But I do have to deduct points from it because his character's name is Tyler Rake, and he actually kills a guy with a rake at some point and does not make a Schwarzenegger-esque comment on the fact that that's his name. So that was a bit of a bummer.
I thought you were going to say that you're taking away points for him being called Rake and also killing someone with a rake. I'm like, that's adding points, if nothing else.
Yeah, no,
but
absolutely.
I see it,
yeah, totally. Yeah. But no, amazing from an action level, but that's most all that it has going for it. But worth a watch.
Nice.
And that's me.
Nice one, Connor.
So as Ben mentioned, I watched a good chunk of Middleditch and Schwartz. But in addition to that, I've watched, me and my fiance were looking for a new series to get onto, and we decided to check out Billions, which has been out for ages, but has never been something that we've really gotten into. And I think it's on its like 5th season now, which that kind of shit daunts me. Like it just feels like it feels like it was going to be Suits, right? Which is like really cool concept, good for the first season or 2, 3, and then they would have just run out of ideas, and like they're just dragging this fucking thing along. So I was a bit, hesitant to get started into it, but we did. And I gotta say, I was pleasantly surprised. It's obviously very well made. the characters are interesting, and they don't rely too heavily on a gimmick, like Suits did. Although you do get some pretty significant Suits vibes. But yeah, like the characters seem complex. They're not just, throwing around legal jargon or just throwing around trading jargon in order to confuse the audience and just say like, hey, we just magicked up a solution. There's genuine plot threads that you can follow that kind of hold your interest. And so yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised by this series. I didn't think it was going to be nearly as good as this.
How many episodes a season?
I think 10, roughly.
That's good. That's kind of like the new normal for these drama shows. I think that's good. I don't know much about Billions. I feel like it might be a little similar to HBO's Succession, which I was watching last year, I think.
I haven't had a chance to jump onto Succession. Really it's Showtime, so it's like HBO's little brother. It doesn't quite have that same HBO sheen to it. But, I really like Giamatti. I think that he's really, really he's probably one of the stars of that show for me. But I think everyone, to be honest, everyone in that production pulls their weight really well. And it's one of those, it's one of those series that I find it infinitely interesting how you can have like two protagonists that are opposed to each other. Like the concept is that it's a U.S. District attorney versus this like hedge fund guy, and they take it in turns to explore, I guess the perspective of each person, and you don't necessarily feel swayed one way or the other, at least not by the show. The show kind of presents it like these are two people and you can kind of like figure out whose side you're on.
Nice.
Yeah. Watch that. And I also watched a good chunk of Midnight Gospel, which is the Duncan Trussell Netflix series that was also produced or directed by the guy that did Adventure Time. Can't remember his name.
Now, Pendleton Ward. Now, I didn't bring this up on the last episode because how hard is the show to describe as a concept?
Dude, I chucked on 2 minutes of this and I was like, I am not ready. I have to be in a certain headspace for this show because it's out there.
Look,
certain headspace.
And I know I'll enjoy it. I just had to I need to chill out on this for a neck minute.
Yeah. I know exactly how it was pitched. Like it would have been Duncan Trussell being like, I have these really interesting conversations with people. I'd love to do like podcast 3.0, where we have that like kind of almost long form conversation and add a visual element to it. And like Duncan Trussell's a pretty trippy dude anyways. So this kind of seems right up his alley. But I got to say, as a way to convey concepts that are pretty outside the mainstream, I fucking love it. They talk about some really interesting concepts that, they mostly revolve around Buddhism and meditation and mindfulness and,
drug use,
all that kind of stuff, and drug use,
mushrooms, copious amounts of mushrooms.
But it does it in this like really bizarrely responsible way. Like he's talking to people that actually have knowledge. Like the whole concept of the show is that the show is about, like, he goes to other dimensions and he has conversations with people on his podcast, but it is actually like the conversation is like a podcast, right? So you're basically listening to this podcast with this kind of free, almost like free form animation, like psychedelic shit happening in the background. And you kind of like, you're propelled by the visuals, but you're listening to what they're saying. And it's, in terms of getting some of these a little bit more trippy concepts out there, I think it's really brilliant.
Yeah, and like 5% of the conversation they're having is like clearly like scripted to move the visual story along, but the rest is just essentially a podcast.
Well, but it changes as well, because I'm not sure how far you're in, Ben, but I think about episode 4 or 5, the dynamic shifts. So some episodes feel like they're like 20% scripted, 80% freeform conversation. Other ones seem as though they are like 80% scripted and 20% freeform conversation. And it's not like freeform as in like, you know, ad lib or anything like that. It's like it's just people having a conversation. So it's I couldn't tell you any other kind of show like it out there. And you know, I got to give it props for that.
Yeah, I'm keen to see how it develops, because Adventure Time is one of the slowest of slow burns in terms of actually becoming about kind of the characters and the continuity and the world and the story. So I'd be interested to see if that kind of creeps into this as well.
Yeah.
Nice one, man.
George, that's it for me.
I checked out The Last Dance, which is this new Netflix doco on the Chicago Bulls. And I am nowhere near a basketball fan whatsoever, but I was a huge Michael Jordan fan, as every kid was. Let's not talk about the sports aspect of this. Let's just talk more about, I'm so impressed with Netflix's ability to put together a really cohesive documentary. While still it darts around through timelines. It goes back to the 80s, comes back to the 90s, and it's always flip-flopping, telling you all these different characters and these personalities that you meet along the way. And it's just super impressive and super engaging. You know, I said to my wife, my wife and I are totally in this, and you guys know Ash, like she's not into basketball, but we're fully captivated by this show because of the personalities, because of the dynamic, because of these characters that they build. I think, I
was saying there's some serious lag going on here. That's almost the hallmark of a good documentary, right? Like, I could give you facts, but I mean, that would it'd practically be a PowerPoint presentation, right? And only the people that are the most interested in that particular subject or have any interest in the information that I'm giving you. But if I give it to you in a story, I can tell you about anything. It doesn't matter if it's like the most boring shit on the planet. Like, I could talk to you about chess or Go or like, I don't know, software or something like that. But
Go is interesting as hell. You shut your face.
It's not interesting. It's frustrating as fuck, and it can go to hell. Single most difficult game I've ever played. I cannot get it. That was a tangent I did not expect.
Fuck you. Fuck you, dude.
It's about the story. So I mean, like, it doesn't matter whether you're interested in basketball. It's all about like, are they putting forward a good story? And that documentary is more Game of Thrones, House of Cards than it is, about the Chicago Bulls.
100%. And I've really fallen in love with Dennis Rodman, who I've always known, but I've never really sort of known that he was like in the Chicago Bulls. Like, he's always just been one of these like really crazy personalities that was, he dated Madonna and he's friends with, Kim Jong-un and whatnot.
Turns up on any number of 90s sitcoms you watched as a kid.
But you see him evolve in this show, and you see him as a kid and him transform, and it's a really, really interesting insight into him and the three main contributors to the success of the team. Anyway, listen, I'm not going to harp on about this too much. I'm also but this is really fantastic, and I'm also very interested in Netflix's release strategy here. Unlike Tiger King, they're drip feeding this out 2 episodes at a time every Monday, and I am just like chomping at the bit. I'm like, give it to me, motherfucker.
That's very unusual for them.
Yeah, and you know what? It's very interesting, and it's keeping the conversation going, like we were talking about with Mandalorian. It's sort of elongating this piece. Like, Tiger King has had a really short spike, but if we're going to use some terminology that's been thrown around recently, they're flattening the curve of engagement, and they're going to spread it out over several episodes and several weeks.
Very interesting, right? Because like the docuseries will not make the same kind of like depth of impact as Tiger King made. So I'm very interested to see whether they had, like, if you had 2 documentaries, right? And you could have this strategy where the first one, you release it all at once, this big impact, you're going for maximum depth. You want as many subscribers to come onto your platform as possible. Everyone's talking about it, gets it on there. So you have that. And then that's the acquisition phase. And then you've got that retention phase where you want to keep people interested. So then you provide them with a more elongated, piece of content. I wonder if that's why they're doing it. If that is why they're doing it, it's pretty fucking genius.
I don't know if they would have ever anticipated the success of Tiger King at that level. They've put out a lot of documentaries.
How could they? There was a lot of special factors to that.
I think there was that. Yeah. So I don't necessarily know, but I think them doing the two strategies in parallel with each other ties in with your point, Connor. And I think, it's really interesting to see that. And Netflix, they've got a thing on coronavirus on there. Not that I'm going to watch or touch that shit, but these guys pivot fast.
Well, they've
got that startup vibe. I still really love Netflix, and I'm falling more in love with them over the past 6 to 12 months.
I'm really interested, Ben. Over the last, I'd say, year or year and a half at least, you've kind of the vibe I've gotten from you with regards to Netflix has been pretty bad, let's say. You kind of, say like on Netflix with some like level of disdain, and there was definitely times where you talked about even just getting rid of it. Where do you sit with Netflix now?
It's not too different, to be honest. I think it's like, in terms of right now having access to Amazon Prime, Stan, Netflix, I think it's probably my least watched.
What are you watching on Stan?
And
I'm so unimpressed with Stan. Like,
I think their library is awesome.
It's all old stuff, though. I can watch that anytime.
I'm happy to. Yeah, on Stan. that's what I'm looking for. Like the fact that I go on Stan and they have 300 episodes of Adventure Time. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty happy with that. But I think all three have like fantastic licenses. But I'm not really. I don't know. I'm not looking for original content from any of these three providers necessarily, specifically. I'm more interested in kind of pre-existing stuff or ongoing stuff. And yeah, I think Netflix is getting better, in my opinion, at their original content in terms of the movies. Mostly the movies is all I was really critical of. But yeah, about the same.
I'm so impressed, man. We just chucked on this thing. It was like the fittest of Dubai. It's like this fitness competition in Dubai, and it's like this 1 hour. It's like Amazing Race or something, and it was just like these crazy athletes from around the world. Just going at it for these challenges, and it was like, this is cool. Like I'm enjoying just like kind of zoning out and watching something a little bit. Like, I don't really watch that kind of stuff. The last time I don't have Channel 9 and stuff. I can't watch it. I don't have a TV aerial in my TV, so like these kind of things, I don't really watch them that much. But it's cool to see that kind of thing on Netflix.
I was watching. I was doing the same thing. There's the CrossFit documentary on Netflix, and I remember like watching it, and you're sitting on the couch being a lazy fat shit, and you're like, "This works."
Yeah. You suffer through this, motherfucker.
That's what I use YouTube for. I watch more YouTube than those other three easily. Because that's just because YouTube, the fucking quality of the content that people are just putting up on there, it's insanity. Us included, of course.
Of course.
Have either of you guys buckled at all yet and watched any of Too Hot to Handle?
I looked at it. I was very tempted. I think today, because we basically
is that like the Love Island show?
Yeah.
We watched the trailer.
I was very close.
Dude, with the amount of time,
I'm proud of you boys.
The guy, like, we watched the trailer, and the guy is like, it's the sloppiest, tonguiest kiss you've ever seen. And I was like, slurpy derpy, I'm getting the fuck out of here. Please do not turn that on.
I have always been really, like, I've had so little interest in like maths and like, the competition cooking shows and all that shit. Like, it's just, it has, and people talk about like the reality TV, that it's just like, oh, it's like this guilty pleasure and all that. I'm like, I actively despise most of it. I just think it's like, it's so manufactured and just like not in a good way. And so I generally steer clear of that. I don't know what it is about this that interested me. I think that you just become so Like they're just like, we want to see if people will fuck. Like there's no like
it's the transparency.
No preface anymore. Yeah. They're not trying to say like this is actually about putting people in a...
It almost feels like a satirical reality show. Like it feels like a reality show you'd see in a movie about a dystopia. I did have that thought. I watched any, but I was like, maybe there is an angle to this, that maybe there is actually some kind of worth to this show. It probably isn't, but I bet their viewing numbers are insane for it.
Oh, it would be. It's like they're taking like the second last vestige of free to air TV and just saying, fuck you, we can do this too. I mean, I reckon the next big thing is that they're going to get some kind of deal for sports. Like,
yeah, you're probably right, dude.
Man, they must be looking into that hard.
I mean, it's the last thing that, I mean, and I know we harp on about this a lot, but like, that's all Foxtel has right now is sports basically. And they don't even have that now. Like they are fucked.
Don't they have KO Sports? Isn't that a subsidiary
KO's different.
Is it not? I thought that was created. I thought it was created by Optus or something, or Telstra or somebody.
Optus, not Foxtel.
Oh, okay.
I think it's. Yeah, no, it's Optus. I think I had it when I had Optus or
fuck. Who knows, Telstra. Bro? Shit gets complicated.
But it's. I mean, like it's. You know, Foxtel. Just they're so overpriced for what they're offering, and I reckon they maybe have a year or two left on the Australian market before they're fucking toast.
Thank God.
I really hope you're right. I really do, but I think I probably said that a couple of years ago too. I don't know how they're hanging on because I go away.
Sports.
Yeah.
Baby boomers.
Yeah, I never factored that in. That's such a blind spot for me.
KO is Foxtel.
It is Foxtel. See, they've pivoted. Yeah,
it is Foxtel.
They're going to be all right, mate. They're going to be all right.
I had KO for like a month week. And then fucked it off.
Yeah.
It's over.
Do they have Premier League on that?
For what it is. I don't know. I had it for the rugby union when the World Cup was on.
Okay.
For those on the podcast, Ben is slowly just inching his way off screen.
Ben's just like, this is way too much about sports. Even though Ben and I have gone on a run, not recently, but during quarantine, and he is quite a fit man.
Correct.
Well, actually, I beat your ass, so
maybe
I was impressed.
I'm running on the beach now.
You beat Ben.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, I beat his ass.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I will have to see that.
Ben would sprint ahead, and then he'd wait there for 5 minutes, puff the fuck out, and I didn't stop once. I just went round at my pace, and I fucking...
All right, next time I'm not taking pity on you, motherfucker.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go.
Please don't, because I've run with Ben, and Ben has like a weird athletic ability. Like it's I've climbed with him and I've run with him, and it's like. It's frustrating is what it is.
Listen, Ben didn't do anything for like 18 years, and then all of that compounded, and it was just like burst through. It burst through like...
Yeah.
And I was there to see it all, and it was wondrous.
There's a tangent for you about when we're going to get rock climbing again.
Episode 150, come on, we got to bring it back.
It's not going to happen for a while.
Little bit of news, not too much, but we got some updates on the Oscars. Benny, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so we've all been the go-to joke in the movie world right now is that the Best Picture nominations next year are going to be, Sonic the Hedgehog and Bloodshot, because nothing's been released in theaters so far, and that's such a big sticking point for the Academy. Is it has to be theatrical. All these Netflix films, they have to do a mandatory theatrical run just so they can be eligible.
I wonder they've just come out if they'll lax that for this. If the alternative is Bloodshot, the Academy Award goes to Vin Diesel and in Bloodshot. I reckon they'll change their tune pretty quick.
What a win!
Yes, so they have come out today and said that, and they're still being very strict about it, but theatrical. Releases obviously aren't happening, so VOD and streaming films will be eligible for the Oscars. They have the very specific proviso that they had to have had a planned theatrical release that got cancelled or delayed. So they're still being very sticky about it. They also said specifically for this year only, so it's not too much of a jump forward for them, but What do you guys think about this?
I think it's obviously a crack in the wall. It's, if I'm to be honest, they're going, like, they must know that that's where they're going. Like, there's a bunch of like Netflix movies that they tried to get into contention last year, that they had theatrical releases. And I mean, it's ticking a box. And I reckon a couple years of content creators ticking boxes, people are just going to see it for what it is. It's like it's just the whole theatrical release is a bit of a joke at that point. Now, I'm not saying that I don't like theatrical releases, and in a perfect world, you'd be able to, like, Extraction would be showing on the theater now as well as streaming. Because I think that I do think that there's the value of the experience of going to a cinema, and I think that cinemas need to really sell that. But in terms of them sticking to the specific provisos, I don't think it's going to stick for too long.
Hey, Connor, why do you hate cinema so much?
Is that what I said?
In fact, I
think it's the exact opposite of what I said.
I think there's a huge paradigm shift coming through. I mean, we've seen this week that AMC theaters aren't going to be playing Universal films anymore. And I believe another cinema chain has jumped on that bandwagon. This is because Trolls was released digitally. So we're seeing like a new world, old world shift here. And the Oscars saying, hey, this is only coming in for this year. I'd take it with a grain of salt. This could be a forever thing. And I won't be surprised if that's the case. We don't know how long coronavirus is going to be around for. It could be here for the next 18 months. So like, this is what's going to happen when cinemas open. You're going to have 1 or 2 seats in between. You're not going to be able to have sold out sessions. How will people line up? There's a lot of things to figure out here, and it's going to get to the point where I think these movie studios go, shit, we got to move fast on something because we need to get some revenue in the door. And there's all these movies sitting around. I mean, another thing as well is they're saying Tenet's moving ahead and going to be released. Do you guys think that's going to happen? I mean, I know this is sort of morphed into a more of a general state of cinema kind of segment rather than focusing on the Oscars.
It's going to like get the theatrical release.
They're saying
they're sticking with it.
Release.
It feels like a Chris Nolan mandate, doesn't it? It's like, this has to be in cinemas.
July 17th.
Yeah. I mean, it will definitely go ahead in America. They're kind of reopening things as we speak, which is we don't need to get into conversation about that. Yeah. But I mean, it is kind of the last stalwart that's like, we're doing the cinema. I don't know.
I mean, it would crush Nolan to be released on streaming, but would you guys rather July 17th hear, Tenet's coming out on streaming, or would you rather hear we're postponing this for a cinema release?
So I think in this specific situation, it's very much, it would not open in Australia. I don't think we'd be opening cinemas yet. I think it'd open in America and maybe some other territories around the world. But I mean, for the thought experiment, if it was opening here, I would rather it didn't be in cinemas. Yeah, I'll go to a cinema and sit 6 seats away from someone.
Oh,
I work in a cinema.
Like, if the question is like, would you rather have it delayed or get it now on streaming? I'd rather have Tenet delayed, because that's one of the few films that I think there's actual merit in seeing it in that. There's some films that I like the option, right?
Dunkirk, got Nolan's last one. That's not that great at home. Is Tenet the same?
No.
Yeah. I can name you, like, I mean, not every film I've seen in the last 10 years, but I can name you a fair few that, I'd be disappointed if I hadn't seen them in the cinema.
Yeah.
I have a sneaky suspicion that Nolan films, not only because that he shoots on film, I mean, that I've never really been one to say that film and digital are light years apart or anything. I could give two fucks. But in terms of like the sound, the scale, the way it's meant, like the visually, like that presence. I just feel like it feels more like an event.
Yep, I know exactly what you mean. And you know what could potentially happen here is that Universal, you know, I believe 2 major chains have said we're done with you, and said we're not taking on your films. You know, Universal just goes on. They're bringing out a streaming platform. I'm pretty sure they just go, shit, man. We have to go and really transform this company completely in terms of the distribution side of things. You know, the production side of things stays the same.
I think
but the distribution side of things
that's
is like
hilarious. Like the theaters going to Universal and being like, we're boycotting you. That is like, from what position of power are you making this kind of, like, what leverage do you think you have? It's like
the gentleman's handshake within the movie industry is like, you know, there's kind of like this wink, wink, you know, you're not going to release your shit on streaming. And that sort of, that handshake has been, you know, from there, obviously AMC's perspective has been undone. But I know exactly what you mean, man. These are unprecedented circumstances.
Yeah. But I just think it's like, it's one of the, it feels petty, and it also just feels like a bad decision. Like, you are in an industry that is under siege by like general circumstances at the moment. What is it like? Why would you make things harder for yourself?
Can cinemas survive without films like Tom Cruise's The Mummy? Will they be able to get by?
Trolls.
I mean, no. The simple fact of it is, no. If they play that with the market, they can't.
Jurassic World's coming out. That's probably going to crack a billy. You know, Travara's on the case. Travara's on the case.
No. But I mean, it's just, but like, I mean, that's a huge hit to their, like, I mean, if they're playing that kind of game, and let's say it's Universal, well, what's next? Are they going to say no to Paramount as well? Or like, you know, whoever it is. It's such a dangerous game for cinemas to be playing right now. They need to be. I mean,
this is all part of the thing, the inevitability, whereby the only things that are ever going to be in cinemas for the rest of our lives are Disney movies.
And also, you know, the inevitability that, you know, we had a lot of casualties in the last decade. We had, Connor's gone. We had Blockbuster. You know, who would have thought Blockbuster would have gone under if you told somebody in 1994? You know, but you know, shit changes, man, and there's going to be a fair few casualties along the way. Premium enterprise brands, you know, we're going to see them shut up shop. And you know, the famous story is, what is it? Netflix pitched to Blockbuster, and it was like a handful of millions for the acquisition, and they laughed them out of the door.
Yeah, I love that story. There's something about like,
it's so satisfying.
That kind of stuff. It's the same thing with like Sony and Marvel, them like laughing them out of the room, be like, all right. Yeah.
You know, the only constant is change. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see how many casualties in terms of the movie and these cinemas and whatnot. There's another little piece of Oscars news here, right, Benny?
Yeah, speaking of casualties, the Oscars also announced that they're going to be combining the kind of a running joke on our podcast. They're combining the categories for sound mixing and sound editing into one award. We did it. We rallied for this for years.
It took 3 years.
Yeah. And the response to this has been varied. A lot of people kind of being like, wait, what's the difference between those two? But then the people, of course, in the know, are very disappointed that the sound side of things is being kind of diminished a little bit in recognition.
You know what? I was thinking about this, and I truly believe, like, you know, like when you listen to a great album, you know, you're not thinking about what amp they used. You're not thinking, oh, what snare cymbal did he use? Did he use a Zildjian or did he use another brand? You know, you're just thinking about the feeling and the vibe. You know, and in this category here, you know, when thinking about best cinematography, we're talking about sort of feeling and vibe and whatnot. And best sound mixing, you know, sound editing, I get that, like, were the swooshes and the sound of the vehicles and the overtones, like, did you get an atmosphere within the sonic palette of it? But then mixing's a very technical task, and it's almost like a presentation thing. It's like, yeah, tick that box. Like it's a technical task. It's not a creative task. So like I've always struggled to sort of understand that and differentiate them, because they're almost one in the same at the end of the day. When you're sitting there in the film, it's like, you know, if the sound edit worked, the mix was responsible for that as well. So it's sort of hard for me to sort of make sense of it all. And I believe this is a good decision.
My main issue with the difference between
dividing
them,
each aspect.
Sorry, my main issue with the difference between them has never been that they don't deserve separate recognition for each, because I don't understand the difference, but I know a lot of people would in the industry. But my main issue has always just been that I would assume 90% of the voters in the Academy don't know or care what the difference is. So it's kind of pointless in the end. They would just, for both categories, they would just pick, oh yeah, that one had sound that was good.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it kind of begs the question, like, how deep down should we, slice the categories into? Like, there's lots of visual aspects that comprise to create that side of it. I think sound mixing and editing, the disciplines are pretty blended. There obviously are people that do sound editing, and there are other people that do sound mixing and creation and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, yeah, the general appreciation, I think, comes down to one kind of task. Like, how does the movie sound?
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. So I think it's a good decision.
Forgive my ignorance. Have they announced what the award will be called?
Sound.
From now? Just sound? Best sound. There you go. That's easy.
Yeah.
us laymen, well, not you, George, but we can certainly pick an easy one for that.
Yeah, let's see how we go. Folks.
Yeah, and you mentioned up top, Georgie, that we've got some returning faces to the Matrix franchise. And they're, of course, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch. Two men who have risen far from their stations when that franchise was still a thing. They're, of course, the directors of the first John Wick film, and they've both kind of split off and done their own thing since then. Amazing stunt workers. Probably a huge part of why the Matrix itself is so iconic at this point. So it's good to see them back.
I think it's always a very interesting and oftentimes a commendable move for these guys to take a step back. You could look at this as like a step back in their career. As guys who are directing Deadpool and John Wick, some of the biggest franchises on the block, to go back to the stunt coordinator role, this is obviously, they must have had a real feeling of importance to get back in here, and they did cut their teeth on this and do some really incredible stuff here. So there must have been a real impetus to feel like, okay, I don't want anyone else to be involved in this. This is my ground, and this is that franchise that means a lot to me, and I'm moving back in here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it says something great about the environment that they must have fostered making this film, because I was just reading today, Joe Pantoliano, who played Cypher in the original, was pretty much begging to be involved in this somehow. I hope he is, because he's fucking awesome. Yeah, how are you guys feeling on Matrix 4? We haven't talked about it in a while. There's been a few set photos kind of dripping out here and there, a few plot details maybe.
It's going to look amazing.
It's a weird one.
Like it's going to have some really, really dope shit in there. Just as a whole piece, how is it all going to tie together? That's where I'm not. My confidence is quite low, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's the proviso that any concept can be good. Like there's, if you've got a good story, or if you've got good writers, directors, and all that kind of thing, you can pretty much make a good movie out of anything. Having said that, there are things that are more difficult to pull off. And I think this would be one of the things that is very difficult to pull off, just because you have the weight of expectations. You have, it's a sequel, so you're working within the confines of a certain IP. Like, there's just a lot of factors in this that, like, they really need to bring in their A game on this for this to be passable, right? and they need to do a fucking outstanding job. Like if you think about movies where the sequels were better than the originals, or the remakes that happened 20 years later, 30 years later, whatever it was, were better than the originals. Like those movies, there are some of the best work that the people have done, that the directors have done, and all that. So it's, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I am saying that this is a monumentous task.
Yeah, because I mean, that question is like hard to answer in terms of things that are better when you return to a franchise, make a sequel or a reboot. But when you're talking about the Matrix of all things, like that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Good luck to them.
Very intrigued to see how that turns out. All right, well, that's about all the news we've got this week. But before we move into Movie Book Club, let's catch up with a question of the week. We love hearing from you folks at home, so definitely hit us up with a question for next week. This is from our boy Drew Torres. Speaking of E.T., have you seen the ending of E.T. with the score replaced with just normal sounds? It's so awkward. Do you think a great score can devalue a film in the movie if the movie is much worse without it? What movies filmmakers rely too much on the score to hold up their films? So I definitely think this ties in nicely with our sound mixing, sound editing discussion earlier. And what the first thing that popped into my mind was, well, there's two things. First of which, we had a great conversation about this on episode 1 of The Creators with Dane Hallett. So go check that out. And I remember seeing this clip, and it was of the Brady Bunch. And it was 2 rounds of the clip. It was sort of a 15-second, 20-second sequence. And one was done with the original piece, and the other one was done in a horror way. And they were both equally as effective. And it made me realize...
Missed Doubtfire edit.
50-50, yeah, 50, but not even just the shot selection and stuff. It was exactly the same visually. It was literally just the sound bed that got replaced. Yeah. And I was like, it's 50-50 visuals and sound in films.
So, I mean, do I think that there are examples, I think, of movies that use music as a crutch? And in those kinds of cases, a movie's putting in a cool song or using really dramatic, really dramatic music to prop up a less than impressive scene. Having said that, I think in those cases, you can always tell that that's like, you get this feeling that that's what's happening, right? Because
it's very melodramatic
yeah. The music and the visuals don't gel together. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with like overly dramatic or like dramatic or melodramatic music, so long as the scene is appropriate for the music. So when you're talking about, and because of that, I don't think it's fair to take away music from a scene that is designed to accompany that kind of music and say, look how shit this scene is, because the whole point, like the whole medium, is about everything coming together. There's a bunch of films that you could go to that don't have the same impact. Like if you went and looked at Baby Driver, which is something that I watched recently again, that movie loses a lot of its impact if you take away the score from it. And I don't think that's fair, because that movie is meant to be watched with that score. So
imagine watching the scene that's scored with, or has the soundtrack of Hocus Pocus by Focus, that yodeling song, to which the action is completely synced up to.
Yeah.
It would be almost meaningless without that. Yeah. Okay, Connie, you just touched on this. I think in terms of the question about when it's too much of a crutch, I think that's only really the case when people are using songs rather than score. If the score is doing its job and it's making you feel it, then I don't think that's a crutch necessarily. I think that's filmmaking. I think that's what it's meant to do. For an example, I found the use of, was it Father and Son in Guardians Volume 2, the funeral scene at the end of that, using one of the most emotional songs ever created that makes every grown man cry in a scene that's meant to make you cry. That felt like a crutch, especially coming from a franchise so well known for using slightly more deep cuts in terms of soundtrack. To play something that obvious in that scene was effective, but there was also that niggling feeling of, Yeah, all right. You could have done a bit. You could have worked a bit harder for this. And in terms of for ET itself, I watched that a couple of weeks ago, of course. And I will openly admit that 90% of the reason I was crying like a baby in that final scene was because of John Williams' unbelievable score for that film. But it's all working, you know, in tandem with each other. I think it's, I don't know. It's interesting to think of if it's because all filmmaking is manipulation. It's all techniques to try and make you feel things. So I think it's all fair game, essentially. Like, can you imagine what Inception would be like without Hans Zimmer?
Yeah,
what would that movie be?
And that's my point. Like, you can't. The whole point is that as long as everything feels as though it fits together, like, you know, as long as the visuals at least gel with the music, which gel with the sound design, which does, you know, all that kind of stuff, you know, then I have absolutely no problem. And I think that if you took, like, I think I was thinking about this the other day because I was listening to music that I'd seen in a trailer, and you know, it's one of those instances where you're like, fuck, this is good. Like, you get this rush from the music, and you find the song on its own, and the song on itself doesn't give you the same kind of rush. And it's one of those things where, like, the whole is more than the individual or the sum of the parts, right? And you know, if you were just to arbitrarily take one of those parts out and then say, hey, look how shit this is, like, that's not really fair. Yeah. So, you know,
I love cinema sins.
It's like taking a comedian's jokes that he's performed on stage and writing them out and then, like, asking, you know, just reading it on a page. Like, that's not a fair representation of what's being done, right? Like, you could just say, like, oh, this isn't funny, but you're missing all the inflection, the pauses, the way they deliver it. So, I just...
To answer the first part of the question, I have not seen the video of the ET final scene without the score. I'm definitely going to go look it up right after this because I think it would be so starkly different from the final product.
It is.
I think in terms
and it makes sense.
You know, the filmmakers that rely too much on it, I think you're right, Benny. It's all fair game, but, you know, it's a really stock standard answer, and we've already mentioned it, but Chris Nolan, I remember some parts in Interstellar, especially part where Matt Damon with the swirly spaceship and stuff. I remember being like, not maybe on my first viewing, but on a secondary or whatever viewing after, kind of being like, this is really overcooked, man. You know, you're really shooting a little too far. But, you know, Nolan normally gets it so perfectly right with Hans Zimmer. You know, that's the only instance where, you know, Hans Zimmer is so part of the palette. He really sticks out, you know, unlike a lot of other composers. But I don't think that's a reliance on Nolan. I just think in that particular sequence, I remember specifically being like, it's a little overbearing, man.
An example I found of this that really stood out to me, one of the only times where it jumped out this hard would have been Tron Legacy. Specifically, one of the best, most dramatic tracks in the entire film. And I don't think I'd listened to the soundtrack before the movie, but I just remember, like, hearing this amazing, really, like, emotional experience happening and seeing what's happening in the scene is they're just, like, going down in the elevator. Like, it's falling too fast or something. It's meant to be dramatic, but you don't give a shit about anything happening in the movie. And it's just, like, so intense. And the disconnect just makes everything, like, it's worse than if the soundtrack wasn't that good somehow.
Yeah. Anyway, Greg, far out. That just didn't happen. That just didn't happen. Great question, Drew. Thank you so much with that one. Folks listening in, we need a question for next week. Hit us up. We'd love to hear from you. Something I've been very excited about, Movie Book Club episode 1, brought to you by Connor this week. Connor, you decided to choose Prisoners. Why don't you give us a little bit of context about why you chose this and the thought process there?
Honestly, mostly because I know that you hadn't seen it, and I was tired of me and Ben talking about it, and like, I wanted, like, it's one of those things where,
so,
like,
it was out of sheer exhaustion, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, pretty much. No, it's like because there was a concept, like, when Ben proposed the concept, it was like, you have to watch it. So my mind went to, like, if I wanted to make Ben and or George watch something, what am I going to use that choices for? My initial thought was to use it for evil, but no, I decided, like, in this particular case, like, I know that you hadn't seen it. I wanted to get your opinion on it. I know that me and Ben, how we feel about it. And honestly, I hadn't watched it since, like, it came out. Like, I haven't watched it in probably about 6 or 7 years. So, you know, I was really interested to revisit it, and I knew that my fiance hadn't seen it either. So it was kind of a win-win for me.
Yeah, nice one. Listen,
what did you know about it before we jumped in?
Sorry?
What did you know about the film? Like, what was your reference point?
Well, I've ushered on this when we all worked at the cinema together, and I remember ushering on this, and I saw a few scenes, and I had these sort of lingering thoughts in the back of my head. We should probably mention here, everyone at home, this is going to be spoiler heavy, so you know the idea with this movie book club is we're all watching this together. So feel free to you know follow along for next week's one. But my thoughts was you know Villeneuve. Going into this one, it's an outrage that I haven't watched this already, and also like, I'm so glad I haven't watched this because, you know, Connor's shitting on about it. Benny's told me how great it is. Like, you know, I'm keen. I'm really keen. A couple things happened with this. My wife, Ash, who we normally watch most things, she said things together. She said, "I'm not watching this. It's too intense." So I was like, "Okay, interesting. That's something to highlight." Mm-hmm. And another thing as well is, yep, and really enjoyed it. Really thought it was great, but was just the subject matter and everything was really a little too intense and whatnot. And I watched it with my headphones that I'm wearing right now. With my laptop, and these are audio engineering, like mixing headphones, and like the set. I'm just going to say, like, I was at the end of this film, I went to speak to Ash, and she said, "I've never heard you be so vocal in a film." I was like, "Holy fuck, get outside. Like, I was in this movie end to end. So I think that's a good place to start. What was it like for you guys revisiting this one on a second viewing? Or maybe third viewing?
Yes. Had forgotten all the best parts of this film. And I don't mean the best parts in terms of like the scenes or anything like that. Just like things about this movie that I really appreciate in terms of the craftsmanship. Yeah. I mean, I should also mention that one of the reasons that I wanted to do this is I'm absolutely in love with Villeneuve. And it's funny. I've one of the movies that I really want to clock soon is one of his older films, Incendiaries. But yeah, so like that was another reason that I wanted to jump onto this, but I just forgot how good of a filmmaker he is, and just little like techniques in this that I just really appreciate it. Like, for example, there's a lot of scenes where you see an outline of someone and then there's like a reflection. Like a lot of this movie, you're like watching through obscured views. So like there's a reflection on a pane of glass, and then you just see someone there, and it's just like they're holding onto that image for a really long time. And you like, I don't know what it is about that, but I absolutely love it.
And even in a less literal sense, there are so many scenes where there will be some kind of incident or some kind of expected catharsis, and the movie will just cut out that part and expect you to follow on and assume about this whole big thing that has happened in between scenes, which is fantastic. This is my first Denis Villeneuve film that I'd ever seen. I saw this in cinemas all those years ago and had not watched it since. And I remember being like so impressed with it. It was one of those movies that I'd go around telling people, like, go watch this while you can, being that annoying git who people just don't want to deal with because they have actual lives. I'm like, go watch this movie. But it was so interesting to be able to sit down and watch it again, especially after watching so many other of his films. I actually did watch Incendies, his one film prior to this one, the night before I watched this again, which it's tough for me, man. I don't like sitting down and watching French films. I don't know what it is. It's some internal bias. French films, I just don't like listening to it. But yeah, it's like it's a long one, and it took me like 50 minutes to get into it. But man, it is very much a Villeneuve film, very intense. in some very interesting places it goes.
Yeah.
But this one definitely did something more for me, even having seen it before. What really struck me revisiting it was the pedigree of the cast for this guy's for his English debut. There is like a dozen like A or B list actors in this film, which is insane. And I was talking to a friend the other night. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but wondering how would my response to this film be if it was entirely unrecognizable actors? Because I think there is some kind of pleasure that maybe, you know, cinephiles don't want to admit, but in seeing a bunch of familiar faces, actors you know from other things, working together in something like this, kind of like, you know, the Avengers, but in a really
so it
dramatic
devalues it or something.
film.
Yeah, I can't believe Hugh Jackman is not, like, this is an iconic performance from him, and I'm surprised everyone just shits on about Logan. Amazing, incredible, definitely should be his number one.
I think this is his best performance.
This should be his number two.
I think this is better than Logan.
Yeah, I guess it's the iconic, you know, pop culture element of Wolverine that I'm thinking why it's number one. But
as in, like, popularity wise, like Logan,
like iconic.
Logan
Iconic. Like that is the performance to watch.
Yeah.
Like I feel like this one is like a number two. So like get in there.
Actual performance.
Yeah,
this is by far.
This is dark.
I mean, this is like if you just took any actor and their ability to kind of wrestle with the gray area in their character's morality, their psyche, and all that kind of stuff. This is class A performance. Like this is so good. You can tell that there's that in kind of in like you forget that it's Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman has this kind of image that you know doesn't strike you as who this character is at all, and you forget it. Like you don't look at it thinking that's Hugh Jackman.
To take that in a very literal sense, I love the way that they style him in this film. It feels like the exact antithesis of Wolverine. You know, his hair's completely down, and he doesn't have his sideburns. He's just got a big goatee. It's like he told the stylist, like, make me not Wolverine, please.
And Gyllenhaal as well. He's got this interesting character tics and is a very kind of like a very noble character. Like I was fully on this guy's side.
He's amazing.
But without him being like a cheesy sort of Mark Wahlberg action star, there was empathy. There was just like a good nature to him while still having like these outbursts. You know, he's got a level of excellence about him, and you know he calls out his boss and whatnot. And and it was just, I thought just the nature of the character was very appealing, and the execution was really, really well thought out and well done.
It's interesting that you say or use the word appealing, because I don't think that there's anyone in this film that comes across as appealing to me.
He's like, the only one. Well,
even him, like he seems like that kind of abrasive,
very,
yes, noble, but also a bit of a dick. Like you wouldn't be friends with him. And I love that there's that complexity behind these characters that they don't really go into. Like they don't go into this backstory about how he was in the military and he had something happen to him and that's why he is the way that he is. Villeneuve just puts these characters onto the screen and says, these are real human beings with complex personalities and moralities and that. And he's not wasting time explaining that, but he's also letting these characters kind of just, play out on film. Right, the nervous tick that Jake Gyllenhaal has with his eyes, and the tattoos and the general mannerisms that kind of speak of a full person.
It works well. There's virtually no backstory offered for Detective Loki, Jake Gyllenhaal, in this film, but it doesn't feel like a flaw of the script. It feels like this guy doesn't have a backstory. He's a cop. He's a detective. That's all he is. That's all this guy is about. And it feels like it's that kind of all-consuming character trait that's all you need for him, and it works so well.
Yeah, and this film, it had echoes of Silence of the Lambs to me, it had echoes of Seven. It sort of felt like a new age version of the detective story with added extra complexity in there. The sort of, there was elements of the sort of the forest with everyone moving through searching for the body reminded me of Silence of the Lambs. You know, it had that tone and that thing that you expect from this, but just the gray area and the added complexity was really the extra dimension to this piece that separated it.
It doesn't feel like you'd be doing this movie justice by calling it like a crime thriller, because the crime thriller feels as though it has a very kind of, even Silence of the Lambs or something like that, which may like throw in some twists and turns. Like, I mean, I feel like this one is so, I guess, open to urban interpretation or whatever you may call it. Like, it's just so windy that you're kind of like, it doesn't feel right to like pin it down by that genre.
What I found really interesting about the plot in this film, being a kind of, you know, on the surface, a procedural, a crime investigation film. What I found it quite unique amongst these films in that every plot development that happened, I found to be both the logical next step, but also completely unpredictable. Because I'd forgotten most of the plot beats of this film, watching it again. And I think that's a near impossible balance to strike. Like, everything that happens is completely out of the blue. And I'd seen the film and I was trying to remember where it was going. And I could not pick anything that happened. But nothing felt like a cheap move. It all felt like, yeah, this all works. This all really scans.
You know, there was something that...
I mean, like, nothing in this...
Oh, yeah, you go.
You go ahead. No.
You know, there was this effortless level of storytelling in this film that I just was like, Villeneuve, you're the shit. Like, bow down. Just like two things that happened early on in this film that I was like, I really truly believe I'm gonna love this. The first of which was just before the kidnapping takes place, there's this shot, and it's just a tracking shot on this tree, and it's just gradually coming in, and then that.
How good, right?
And you know exactly what's going on. This sense of dread is fulfilling you, and this situation is unfolding. But, you know, we didn't see anything explicitly on screen. So it's just great storytelling and yeah, masterful stuff. There's another thing that also happened in this, a piece of dialogue where at the beginning, the kid saying to Hugh Jackman, hey, you know, why don't we do up Grandpa's old place and we can rent it out? And he's like, no, it'll be too much. And then later on, Terrence Howard, when they turn up, he's like, oh, you used to live here, didn't you? And he didn't go, oh, this is your dad's place. Oh, you know, it was just like these little connecting dots along the way. And I find that kind of presented as it comes through and you fill in the gaps, you know, those kind of little things like really satisfied me, and I knew pretty early on like this is going to be a great piece.
I think we would be remiss in not mentioning one of the stronger elements of the film, of course, which you just touched on, Roger Deakins, who I read a comment in a review after I watched this recently, the cinematographer who they say that he can make pulling out of a driveway look like the most artful shot you've ever seen, and I think that holds true quite literally for this film. I think there's something about the way he shoots movies that just elevates them to this level that they wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. Not to say that everything else in this movie isn't, you know, fantastic, but the look of it is just so perfect and spot on. It's almost hard to describe why.
There's scenes that that do so little, but you know, are heavily dependent on the cinematography that say so much. I mean, like you mentioned the one with the tree. There's another one that I was mentioning where you're seeing, I think, the detective when he first gets the call. I think it's around there where you're like looking through the rain and through the window, and you're just seeing the outline of Loki. Another one that really stuck with me was the you see Hugh Jackman's character sitting in the car. You kind of just see the outline of him. And again, it's just through the window with much of the reflection of the trees, like just obscuring the actual face. It's like those there's nothing happening in those scenes, right? But they are giving this overall sense of, I guess, dread, or they're communicating something about that character, giving the audience a moment to kind of think about what's going on. It's really good.
Now, I want to check, and I'm going to bet that I'm right, that you guys are on the same page about this. And again, having seen this movie before, but towards the end of the movie when Jake Gyllenhaal is driving to the emergency room, and he's really struggling to get there. Were you guys on the edge of your fucking seat, just like fucking go, man?
That was like insane, and also him running after the hooded guy. I was on the edge of my seat there as well. Like, these are very stock standard, get to the hospital fast, get the hooded guy in the neighborhood. We've seen it a million times, but it's in the effortless of the suspense that Villeneuve just...
And even if you haven't seen it before, as I have, you probably know he's going to make it. But just the execution is just like,
And well, however Deacons represents like, the rain on the windows, like that, how that just slowly got more fogged up was... I was in there with him, you know.
Terrifying,
I've got to say, like, everything in that scene works so perfectly, and it had me like, again, not just from like an action scene, like, you know, him drive, like, it's a cool scene of him like swerving around, like, but there's a sense of urgency in the character, and you also have this like immense like kind of catharsis for the character, like you could just tell that he's like you know, there's that level of suffering and that level of like, doesn't matter what, like, it doesn't matter that I'm bleeding from my eyeballs. Like, I've got to get this girl to the hospital. And it just made me have this, like, such a connection with the character. Like, you were rooting for that character, like 100%. Like, and I just found like the execution of that scene to be spectacular.
Yeah. So
do you guys have any kind of general thoughts? Because I don't even know where I sit on it, on the, you know, possibly the main aspect of the film, which is the little torture room that Hugh Jackman sets up for someone who ultimately is discovered to be more or less innocent. How do you feel about that?
You know what? I thought this movie was heading in. I think this movie was heading in a trajectory that I'm not. I think where it ended up is awesome, and it's like, oh, that guy was. It sort of connected the dots, kind of ending, which was cool. But I was kind of begging for more of like a Zodiac ending where it was very definitive that Hugh Jackman was torturing this kid, and to him to have some association there, you know, he was fully innocent, 100%, and we can't deny that at all. But to have that association the there guy lost a little bit of poignancy for me. Like Paul Dano's character.
No, I think.
And if it had just been a random,
it's really important.
I think that would have been so much more interesting because...
No, I think it's really important to keep that, like, so the whole thing is about that gray area, because Paul Dano, he's not innocent, right? You know, he did kidnap the kids, and he was complicit in you know, the kidnapping of those kids. So it's not technically fair to say that he was 100% innocent, because he knew where the kids were.
And he mistreated a dog, so he's evil.
Well, yeah, mistreated the dog. He did goad Hugh Jackman's character. So it's not like he didn't have knowledge that the kids had been kidnapped. He specifically goaded that character.
I didn't get that impression from him.
Well, the only time that he said, you know, they stopped crying only when I left him. Like, he had the information. It's not like he couldn't have told the police. It's not like they could, like, there's a million things that kid could have done that he had the capacity to do, the ability to do, that he didn't do. So, but I mean, look,
and that's what kind of lost to me. That not lost me. Sorry, that I just thought that wouldn't it have been so interesting that what I thought was going on here was Hugh Jackman was almost like a vehicle for blind faith and religion, and like he was so in this conviction that he was correct, and you know the cost of him like not being correct was less than him just going down this path like vehemently, and then to kind of get this sort of like, oh, he was kind of involved, like that poignancy was lost quite a lot, and it got offset into another interesting area of like this family that's you know doing horrible things to children for decades and decades, and this cult that's formed, but you know that's where the sort of I wanted that more Zodiac kind of gray area ending, and this one was like, oh, this is a neat little bow with and you know obviously we get the ambiguous ending with him. Is he going to make it out of the pit? Is he hearing him? That's a whole other separate thing, I believe. But this was like, oh, here's a nice little bow, and it was awesome. It was awesome.
If you want ambiguity, I'll give you some ambiguity, because I gave this a lot of thought. Because like there's a lot of ways that this film could have gone, really. Like they could have just come out and said that Paul Dano's, whatever his name is, character was completely innocent, which they didn't. They could have said that, you know, him going there directly led to the you know, he actually found his daughter and rescued her or something like that, which they didn't. You're left with this kind of like, what would have the alternative been if he hadn't done what he had done? And the reality is, because I was paying attention to this, because I was thinking about it a lot, the kids would have died if he hadn't done what he would have done. But it also brings into question whether he was right in doing it, like whether the action, like did the means justify the actions, even if the actions could have very much been, or could have resulted in a very different
I feel like it might be a little more complex than that, because I think a big part of the film is Jake Gyllenhaal spends a lot of his time investigating Hugh Jackman rather than the actual case, because of Hugh Jackman's acting so suspicious.
Yeah. But I mean, like, again, that's another factor that comes into it. So I think there's so much ambiguity. When you start thinking about it, it's so difficult to kind of come away with a clear-cut answer about, you know, I think what he did was wrong, but did it result in, like, there's a couple of little clues that they left in there. Like, for example, the aunt says that had Paul Dano, what is his last name? Dano? Had Paul Dano's character been there, she wouldn't have taken the kids out of the pit. So by his absence, actually allowed them to escape. Now it's that's not what Hugh Jackman's intention was. It's not like he was torturing this kid so that they had a chance to escape. But that is something that happened because of that. So, you know, I think if you like this movie has layers upon layers upon layers. Like the more you delve into it, I think that you could study this film for days, if not weeks.
You could say it's labyrinthine even.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey,
so I don't know about this like whole, you know, nice little tight bow at the top of it and saying like this is how things played out. This is who's good, who's bad. This is, you know, what people did made certain things happen. I think this movie is like gray area, and it's something that I think Villeneuve does really well. If you look at stuff like Sicario, you know, Sicario is one of those films as well, which is like, are they good? Are they bad? Like, where do they like? Do the ends justify the means? Like, it's a huge like theme in both of these films. And
yeah, I mean, thematically, you know, that's an interesting point. And thematically, what does it say? The fact that the circumstance was the fact that him being there meant this and meant that. That means the kids came out of the pit. That's what I mean. That's what I mean about this bow, is like this very sort of elegantly put together, you know, this guy was the member of the cult, the snakes, the labyrinth, this, like, it's all very interconnected. And I kind of, where I thought it was going, and listen, this is no complaint. This is like just me, like an observation of maybe where I thought it was going versus where it had ended up. And I just sort of felt like there was this more realistic, more of like there's just these threads kind of coming through and they're not really interrelated, and we're going to end up at this ambiguous ending where we've got actually this guy trying to do the right thing and find his kids, and he's actually in the end, he's the fucking bad guy. And that would have been so interesting. So interesting. I would have
almost found that to be like a gotcha moment. Like and it's obviously something that's in the back of your head the entire time you're watching.
Don't you think it was more of a gotcha moment with how it currently is?
No, because it's so ambiguous. Like, you don't come away from it thinking that, you know, Hugh Jackman's character is good. You don't necessarily come away from it thinking he's evil. Like, I literally, like, I've just been debating with myself. It was still like, all right, well, if he hadn't done this, then
I thought he was pretty fucking evil.
It's just action. But again, like, all right, so what wouldn't you do for your kids, right? And,
yeah, but his conviction, his conviction,
right. And he was right. So again, like, there's a bunch of like, you know, I would never. I don't know that I would say that
he was right-ish.
Well, exactly, he was right-ish, but like, you know, it's just kind of that concept of like, you know, I could make arguments for either side, and I wouldn't do it too strongly because I don't think that the truth lies in either of those like it's not that polarizing. I don't think he's pure evil. I don't think he's just. Like, I think he's somewhere in between, but I can't really figure out how or where he belongs. And I think that if you had come away from that being like, gotcha, he's actually evil, he was just torturing some innocent person, then it would have been such a clear line.
No, you still understand why. You would still understand why. There is some level of like empathy and like, man, this guy's lost his kid. And through the performance of Hugh Jackman, there is a level of like, shit, man.
But it certainly wouldn't have had me thinking about it the same way after. Like, I wouldn't be having this conversation like this right now. Like, I wouldn't be trying to figure out.
You'd be having a different conversation. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I don't think I'd be this interested, because the ambiguity of this, or like not even necessarily the ambiguity, but like the question that it puts forward is genuinely interesting.
What's the question from your perspective?
From my perspective, I don't think that the kids would have survived if he hadn't done what he had done. Like, there's a couple of things that line up so that through pure circumstance, I think the kids survive. But that's where
it almost feels like a Saw.
But
it's like, in Saw how it's like he's actually in the room the whole time and all that. That's where it was almost like a gotcha moment for me with the film, and I didn't think it was going down that path.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't. When I say that like things happen through circumstance, I'm just saying that like there's a million things that could have influenced whether those kids lived or died. And a couple of those things that influenced whether the fact that they lived was that he happened to take this course of action. And it's not like an outlandish course of action. I didn't feel like it was like he was in the room the whole time, because it's not like this kind of like this mechanism of it seems more like a mechanism of fate, of like of happenstance, rather than it was planned the entire time. And so I think that that's a really interesting, like, does unrighteous action, or does like, potentially evil action get justified if the means turn out, even if that wasn't your intent necessarily? Like, the end wasn't your intent, but like the steps that you got to get there weren't really what you intended. And I just think that that's a really fascinating, that's like a really fascinating thread to pull on. Whereas if it was just that he was torturing someone that was completely innocent, and it turned out to be someone else, then it's pretty clear cut. Like, you're like, oh, it's about the fanaticism, and fanaticism is bad, and I can feel empathy for him, but ultimately what he did was bad, evidenced by the result. Whereas now I can say, well, what I think he did was bad, but I can't argue with the result. I just find it more interesting.
Extremely thought-provoking, and I think for a lot of people that is sort of unsatisfying, because it's a difficult thing to come away from a movie to be able.
I want the moral of the story, and I want it now.
Well, yeah, or just any kind of clear-cut answers. So I think, and even on a much more simplistic level, just the ambiguous, last shot of a film, I think some people have issue with. Do you guys have Do you guys have an answer on like, did Hugh Jackman get dug out of that hole? Or?
Yeah, he definitely did.
I think he did. I like.
If watching it again, it's so clear that he can hear the whistle.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's sort of a bit of a nothing in a way.
Yeah,
it was like,
actually, I was thinking about it, and being at night in a heavily wooded area, hearing something like a whistle. I'm trying to think whether I'd take notice of that too much, because you hear a lot of those kind of noises in that, like, especially in windy areas, like wind through trees and that kind of stuff makes some pretty fucking weird noises. And I was trying to think, like, I actually get why he's thinking twice about that, because you would hear stuff like a whistle and just think that could be a million things. So I was actually left quite ambiguous. I think he got dug out. But also, do you guys think it's a bit of a cop-out to do that kind of like Inception, is he or isn't he?
I mean, how else? I think it was a fitting ending for what they were trying to do.
I think it's sort of like, more.
Yeah, I think there was probably 5 different ways it could have gone, and that was probably the best way. If we see a real big epilogue and he gets dug up and then he's in court, like, we know where it's going.
Yeah, I like that.
Again, I like the ambiguity. I like how you get to like continue it with your own conversation.
If
he does get out, what should happen to him? What does happen to him? Like, those kind of things I find are interesting.
You like it, Benny?
Yeah, definitely. As you were just saying, George, the more movies drone on, the more you kind of lose interest towards the back end there. So I think to kind of just cut it when there's really no more you necessarily have to say, I think that's great. It sounds like we all agree that this is a worthy addition to the film book club.
Yes.
Do you guys want to have a quick stab at ranking your Villeneuve films?
Oh, you bastard.
I would definitely say 2049's at the top for me.
Yeah.
I've got to rewatch. I've got to go through a lot. How do you spell his name?
It's Denis, and then Ville.
Denis.
It's not Denis. There's one N.
Same shit, man. You spelled a version of Denis, you bastard.
All right. Well, I'll hop in with the ones I've seen, because I can definitely say that Enemy will always be my fucking goat, because that movie did something special for me. And second place, right now, I'm honestly just going to have to give to 2049 and Prisoners, because I could not separate them on that really high level they're on. Other than that, I think it would honestly, I just chuck the rest in that I've seen on the same level, because these are the ones that really captured me. Other than that, I haven't been grabbed that hard by his films. I think they're really good, but those three specifically, wow.
Yeah, I think for me, 2049's got to be at the top. There's no doubt about that. I would have to put I'd have to put Prisoners in second. I'd probably say it's really that good.
When was the last time you guys watched Sicario?
Yeah, well, you see, Sicario is one where I think it's so brilliant, but for my sensibilities and whatnot, I think for what it's trying to do, it does it so well. But for my sensibilities, Arrival is definitely above Sicario, and Sicario is above Enemy for me. I really love Enemy. I think it's cool, but it's not like, it's still got that sort of like finding his feet kind of vibe to it. But it does have that echoes of, your sort of 90s mind-bending thrillers. So it is a great, and I need to give it a rewatch. It's a good time.
Sicario and Arrival never had a chance for me, because Enemy blew my mind, and Prisoners I thought was amazing. So there was, unfortunately, there was just no way a film could stand up to that version.
Villeneuve's catalog is one of those ones where my favorite is the one that I've watched most recently. Easily. It's just one of those things, I rewatch Sicario, and I can close my eyes and I can hear the soundtrack to that film. And there is such an awesome kind of exploration and disconcerting atmosphere. Fuck, man, I love that film. And then, I remember watching Arrival for the first time and just being utterly fucking blown away.
Same.
I absolutely loved the conciseness of that story, and just the kind of the sound design and the music on that one as well. I find it so difficult to give a top three. I'm looking at the list right now, and every time I'm like, oh yeah, that's my favorite, and then I look to the next one and be like, oh, but that one's so good. How do I? Honestly, I've not come across a Villeneuve film that I didn't like, that I didn't love.
Other than his French ones. What a way to end it. Benny, Connor, that was a lot of fun. And I hope you folks who tuned in with Prisoners had fun listening to us ramble on about it. Hit us up in the comments if you have any thoughts about what we've had to say about Prisoners, or any of your own thoughts that you'd love to convey. The Movie Book Club is an open forum for all. Benny, episode 2 coming up next week. Tell us what your pick is for everyone to watch, and maybe why as well.
Absolutely. Everyone out there, this week we shall be watching a 2018 Korean film directed by Lee Chang-dong called Burning. Now, just as a little hook to get people in, this film stars Stephen Yeun, one of the main guys on The Walking Dead. Fantastic actor. This is a movie that I would implore you to watch as early in the week as possible, because it will sit with you, I think. I think you're going to want to stew on this one for a little while. I watched this late last year. Repeat the name
again for me.
Burning.
Burning.
Lee Chang-dong, 2018.
Okay.
It's a movie I watched late last year, and I had unbelievably high expectations, and I wouldn't say it blew me away, but it stayed in my mind ever since. And those are the kind of movies that I absolutely adore. And I'm honestly very excited to watch this again this week. I'm very keen to hear what you think.
For this, other than pretty much every South Korean film I have watched is superb. So this is very, very exciting from my perspective.
Excellent.
Good choice, Benny. Well, folks, dial it in on your VHS machines. Movie Book Club episode 2 next week. Maybe we'll have some news. Who knows? It's going to be fun regardless.
Same.
Don't forget to check out Creators episode 1 with our boy Dane Hallett. Very fun episode. And Benny and Connor, lovely to see you dudes. Stay well.
As always.
You know, don't
you
eat
too,
too
George.
many.
Stay safe.
Don't eat too much chocolate and red wine. See you
Never.
next week.
Catch you, gents.
Bye. Goodbye.